She showed up in worn-out sneakers, a blazer from a second-hand store, and no makeup. Just a quiet confidence that didn't match the marble floors of Grayspire Capital. The receptionist didn't bother to look up. "Deliveries go to the loading dock," she said flatly. Margot Vale simply smiled and walked on. The hallway was full of sharp suits and sharper smirks. Someone whispered, "Is she the janitor?" Another chuckled, "No, probably someone's mum tagging along." They weren't wrong. She was a mum. A single one. One who once advised central banks in 3 continents before stepping away to raise a daughter with autism. Now she was returning and hiding who she really was. The interview was brutal. They laughed at her resume gaps. One guy posted her photo to TikTok with the caption, "Boomer alert," trying to rejoin the workforce. No one knew what she carried in her old leather bag. It wasn't a resume, it was the acquisition documents. By the time they figured it out, she wasn't asking for a job. She was signing their termination letters, and she hadn't even opened her mouth yet. Her name was Margot Vale. To most of the room, she looked like a woman who'd lost touch. Late 30s, no LinkedIn activity in years, a 10-year-old resume with a 5-year gap, and a wardrobe that screamed thrift over trend. What they didn't know was that every line of silence in her profile was intentional. Every blank space was placed like a trap. Before she became the mom in sneakers, Margot had been a rising force in international finance. At 29, she was the youngest senior advisor to the European Monetary Council. By 32, she was negotiating sovereign debt restructurings across South America. She had once rewritten fiscal policy for a nation teetering on collapse, and done so over instant noodles in a hotel hallway in Lima. But life, like markets, pivots without warning. When her husband died in a car crash, she disappeared from headlines, and headlines disappeared from her. Her daughter, Sophie, had just been diagnosed with autism. Margot traded trading floors for therapy waiting rooms, swapped board meetings for bedtime meltdowns, and built a life without applause, algorithms, or annual bonuses. Now, 5 years later, the world assumed she was obsolete. Especially places like Grayspire Capital. Grayspire wasn't just another investment firm. It was a modern beast, young, hungry, and vicious. Founded by Stanford dropouts and bankrolled by crypto millionaires, the company had exploded into Wall Street with its aggressive takeovers and zero-loyalty culture. Their motto wasn't even subtle: "We bet on blood." Their partners were known for firing analysts over typos and celebrating exits with champagne priced like small sedans. They didn't hire for experience, they hired for edge. And Margot? She looked like she had left hers behind in a diaper bag. The office itself was built to intimidate. Glass walls, brushed steel, concrete ceilings. It felt like a tech startup and a hedge fund had an emotionally unavailable baby. Margot stood out not just because she was underdressed, but because she wasn't trying not to be. She had applied under her maiden name, Margot Reeves. No public digital footprint, no obvious referrals, no recent activity in the financial world. She hadn't intended to make a scene. She just wanted to observe. Her original plan was simple: slip into the system as a nobody, test the firm's claims of merit-first hiring, and quietly decide whether to proceed with a potential investment. She had already acquired 12% of Grayspire's voting shares through shell funds, another 6% through a Canadian pension proxy. And the final piece, that came from a bitter ex-partner selling fast to hurt slower. Together, she now owned 38% of Grayspire Capital. But numbers meant nothing without knowing what kind of culture she was inheriting. So she showed up as a candidate, resume trimmed, voice softened, just a woman hoping to restart her career. What she found was worse than she imagined. In the waiting area, the receptionist judged her shoes before her words. The other candidates, the men in Italian leather and women in Lululemon power suits, glanced her way with half pity, half dismissal. One leaned over to whisper, "Is she seriously interviewing? I thought she was HR's mom." Inside the interview room, things escalated. The panel, 3 mid-level execs with expensive watches and discount ethics, barely concealed their bias. One interrupted her answer to ask if she had kept up with fintech or just Pinterest. Another slid a printout of meme stocks across the table and said, "Explain these to your generation." Margot didn't flinch. She asked thoughtful questions. She thanked them politely. She made mental notes of faces, of names, of every time someone smirked instead of listening. What they saw was a woman out of her depth. What she saw was a company unworthy of its balance sheet. And all she had to do was wait, because by the time her name hit their internal systems, it would already be too late. The panel sat with the confidence of kings, 3 of them, all mid-30s, all with resumes polished like trophies and egos even shinier. They didn't even rise when Margot walked in. "Name?" the one in the navy Tom Ford suit asked, not looking up from his phone. "Margot Reeves," she said calmly. "Background?" the woman in the burgundy blazer asked, flicking through a page like it offended her. "I worked in sovereign finance for over a decade, most recently as a consultant in emerging markets risk." "Then you took a break?" The last one, a bleach-blonde man with diamond cufflinks, arched a brow. "That's a pretty generous term for a 5-year gap." Margot nodded. "My daughter was diagnosed with autism. I stepped back to be her full-time caregiver." Silence, then a snort. "So, no leadership experience since, 2017? Margot didn't answer that. She smiled faintly. The kind of smile that disarms the polite and unnerves the arrogant. The woman in burgundy leaned forward. "You'll have to forgive us. We're not used to career interruptions. This is Grayspire." "Yes," Margot said, still calm. "I've heard." They fired off questions like darts. "Tell me about the last time you managed a billion-dollar portfolio. What do you know about crypto lending platforms post-FTX? How many basis points would you shift in a negative yield environment?" She answered each, not just correctly, but with insight. But they weren't listening for knowledge. They were listening for cracks, weakness, something they could pin their contempt on. The man with cufflinks interrupted mid-sentence. "Do you even know what Slack is?" That earned a chuckle from the woman. Margot tilted her head. "I assume you're referring to the collaboration tool, not the evaluation of rope tension?" The room stilled. A pause. Then another chuckle, but tighter this time. They moved on. The next phase wasn't about knowledge. It was performance theater. A slide deck appeared on the screen. Mock financials from a fictional company. She was told to find the error in 90 seconds. They didn't explain the format. The numbers didn't balance. Some of the terminology was deliberately misused. She found the flaw in 43 seconds. "You were supposed to talk through your reasoning," the woman snapped. "No one asked me to," Margot replied. Then came the speed round. 15 rapid-fire questions designed to trip, not test. Margot stayed steady, poised, precise. But that's not what made them uncomfortable. It was that she wasn't rattled. The man in the Tom Ford suit leaned back. "You don't seem very hungry. Most candidates sweat through these." Margot looked him in the eye. "I'm not most candidates." Another pause, this one heavier. They asked her to leave the room so they could deliberate. As she stepped into the hallway, she caught a glance from the receptionist, an eye roll and a smirk. The other candidates were still there, one of them scrolling on a phone. "That the mom from earlier?" one whispered. "Yeah," the other replied, loud enough for her to hear. "She bombed, trust me." Someone laughed, TikTok opened, a camera clicked. "Hashtag throwback queen," someone said. Margot waited, quiet, alone. Inside, the panel was already laughing. "She said she was in sovereign debt," the blonde man said. "I bet she meant her own." "She's got a brain, sure," the woman added, "but zero edge, no presence." "And she's a mum," said Tom Ford. "They always flake." The receptionist laughed from her desk. 5 minutes later, they called her back in. "We've reviewed your performance," the woman said, not even meeting her eyes. "And while your answers were competent, we don't believe you're a cultural fit." Margot looked at her. "Because I'm not loud enough, or because I'm not young enough?" No one answered. "You'll receive an update from HR within the week," the blonde man said. Margot nodded. "I look forward to it." She stood, smiled, walked out. One of the men in the waiting area muttered, "Told you, she's nobody." She paused at the door, then turned around. "You're right," she said. "I'm nobody you should have underestimated." And then she left, leaving behind a room full of people who had no idea they'd just mocked their future boss, because the real interview was just beginning. 2 hours later, the same panel was called into a boardroom they'd never entered before. The receptionist looked up as Margot walked back through the front doors, this time escorted by a man in a navy suit and an earpiece. She stood as Margot passed, confused. Inside the glass conference room, the panel was already seated, fidgeting, checking watches. A new face entered. A man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with a calm authority that silenced the room. He introduced himself as Jonathan Krell, general counsel to the board. "Before we begin," he said, "please stand." The three executives exchanged confused glances, but complied. Margot entered, not in sneakers, not in her thrift store blazer, but in a tailored navy suit. Same calm eyes, same faint smile. But now, there was no pretense. She placed a black leather folder on the table and opened it. Inside were ownership documents, stock transfer agreements, board correspondence. "My name," she said, "is Margot Vail, not Reeves. Vail, as in Vail Holdings. As in the holding company that now owns 38% of Grayspire Capital." The color drained from their faces. "Today," she continued, "I was not here to apply for a job. I was here to conduct an audit of culture, of ethics, and of meritocracy." Krell stepped forward. "Ms. Vail is assuming her position effective immediately as interim chair of the board's governance committee." The blond man dropped onto his chair. The woman covered her mouth. Tom Ford tried to stammer a word, but nothing came. Margot looked each of them in the eye. "You mocked a mother, underestimated a professional, and violated every principle you claim to uphold. You've shown me everything I needed to see." She slid a second folder across the table. Inside were transcripts, emails, Slack messages, and yes, even clips from TikTok. Captured, saved, printed. "Grayspire prides itself on being disruptive," she said. "Today, so am I." As she left the room, Krell remained behind. "A formal investigation begins today. You're suspended pending outcome. Your system will be audited, your decisions reviewed." Outside, Margot passed the receptionist again. This time, the woman stood. "Ms. Vail, Margot stopped. "Next time, treat everyone like they might own the place." And with that, she walked out, silent as ever, but this time, the whole building heard her. By morning, the footage had gone viral. It started with a single video posted by a candidate in the waiting room, just 20 seconds long. Margot walking calmly out of the interview room. No sound, just her eyes. Cold, controlled, powerful. The caption read, "Turns out she owns the building." Within an hour, it hit 500,000 views. By noon, major media outlets picked it up. Grayspire Capital trended on Twitter, then LinkedIn, then TikTok. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag chairwoman check. Hashtag Vail effect. Hashtag merit over mouth. Business Insider posted a headline, "She came for an interview, she left owning the room, literally." The story snowballed. News anchors debated it. Thought leaders posted think pieces. HR managers across the country scrambled to double-check their hiring protocols. College professors played the clip in MBA lectures. DEI officers forwarded it to boards with the subject line, "We need to talk." Grayspire's press team went into full crisis mode. The firm's founder, still in stealth retirement in the Caymans, issued a vague public statement about respecting all applicants. It backfired. Comment sections erupted. "So you do discriminate, just politely." Shareholders panicked. Grayspire's stock wobbled. A Fortune 100 client suspended its partnership, citing serious cultural concerns. Internally, panicked VPs whispered, "How many others did we treat like that?" Then the audit began. Margot had ordered it quietly, but thoroughly. Emails were pulled, internal Slack threads reviewed, interview feedback sheets, usually shredded, were suddenly retrieved from backup servers. What emerged was damning. A pattern of rejection for anyone over 35, anyone with a resume gap, caregivers, veterans, non-Ivy degrees, people of color with ethnic names flagged by algorithmic bias. There were jokes in Slack threads. Too many vowels, too many kids, too much hair. Screen grabs leaked. Former applicants came forward. One had been told in an interview, "We like hustle, not history." Another, "You're qualified, but we need someone who looks faster." And over all of it loomed Margot's quiet rage. She didn't give interviews, she didn't do press, she let the evidence speak. But behind the scenes, she moved quickly. Within 3 days, 3 directors resigned. The VP of Talent Acquisition was fired. Legal threats began rolling in, from applicants, from regulators, from advocacy groups. At the week's end, Margot stood in front of an internal town hall, not in a power suit, but in jeans and a plain navy blouse. She clicked her remote, and the screen lit up with a new document. The Veil Code. She didn't shout, she didn't smile. "We built a system that rewarded volume, not value," she said. "We pretended to hire for excellence, but really we just hired what made us feel comfortable. That ends now." The Veil Code was simple. All resumes anonymized. No photos. No age or graduation dates. No college name filters. All interviews scored blindly by panels with no access to applicant background. A gasp ran through the room. Someone clapped, then another, then the whole room. But Margot didn't stay. She packed her notes, nodded once, and left the podium. Outside, reporters waited. She walked past them. Back at home, her daughter Sophie was building a tower out of magnetic tiles. Margot dropped her bag on the couch, knelt beside her, and began helping with the red pieces. Later that night, Sophie looked up and asked, "Mommy, did you win?" Margot paused. "I changed the rules," she said, and somewhere out there, the world took a breath, and began rewriting the rules too. She didn't take a victory lap. There were no champagne flutes, no post on LinkedIn bragging about lessons learned, or boardroom takedowns. Margot simply went home. She walked through her front door, kicked off her shoes, and dropped her leather bag on the kitchen counter like any working mom returning from a long, strange day. Her daughter, Sophie, sat at the kitchen table, headphones on, coloring the world in purples and greens. Margot watched her for a moment. This small, brilliant, sensitive human being who had reshaped her world far more than Gray Spire ever could. Then she tied her hair up, rolled up her sleeves, and started boiling pasta. Because sometimes, real power looks like this. She had just rewritten a hiring system that had excluded thousands, had just forced a billion-dollar firm to look itself in the mirror, had just shown the world that you can be both a caregiver and a force of change. But here, at home, none of that mattered. Only dinner did. And maybe that was the point. The following week, the Veil Code was formally adopted, not just at Gray Spire but across 5 partner firms. Anonymous hiring protocols, no resumes with age-revealing timelines, no photos, no college filters, just skill. It sparked what media called the quiet merit revolution. Margot refused interviews. She turned down the speaking gigs, the panel invites, the consulting offers. "Let the work speak," she said. "I have laundry." But her story spread anyway. Across message boards, within HR teams, in quiet Slack channels where mid-career women forwarded the article to each other with one line, "You need to read this." And over time, people began to ask themselves, not just who gets excluded silently, but why. Why a mom in sneakers still needed to prove herself. Why a 5-year caregiving gap could erase a 15-year career. Why, in a world obsessed with disruption, we were still recruiting like it was 1995. The truth is, systems don't change until someone from the outside steps in and says, "Enough." Margot didn't plan to become a symbol. She didn't care about going viral. She just wanted to know if the world her daughter would inherit had room for women who didn't fit into shiny boxes. Now it does, at least more than it did. So if this story made you pause, made you think, made you want to forward it to someone, do it. Share it with the woman who was told she's past her prime, with the man who took time off to raise his kids, with the brilliant candidate whose accent got more attention than his ideas. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't the least qualified. They're just the one who's already rewritten the rules and is waiting to see if you're paying attention.